Oh, that jacket looks great. You looked great before, but that looks great.
Thanks.
Um, okay, well, Marianne, thank you so much for your time. And I just feel like meeting you a year ago, not a year ago, last July on Necker Island was such a gift for me. And you have a few times given me a gentle little prod, and I've just loved for years your wisdom. And thank you for just sharing more of it now today, and also talking about your new book, From Tears to Triumph.
Thank you.
So, Tears to Triumph is obviously a book about overcoming the sadness and sorrow that seems to weigh so many of us down in life. What prompted you to write this book?
Well, we have an epidemic of depression that's happening in the United States. I don't know how it is in Australia. But you hear all the time that people are on medication, that people are taking antidepressants. Like, what is going on here? And I've had situations in my life, and is it good that I'm looking at you this way, or should I be looking at you that way?
You can look at your little camera. There you go.
Okay.
Yep.
I've had times in my life that were very sad, that were times that would be absolutely defined and described by the psychotherapeutic industry and profession as depressed, clinically depressed. And I also, in my work, have had a lot of experience, very up close and personal, with people who have experienced catastrophic situations. I was deeply involved with the AIDS crisis, and just the nature of my work is such, I always say people don't usually come to me because things are going well. So grief, heartache, divorce, financial ruin, bankruptcy, these are situations that I know personally, not having experienced all of them in my life, but having experienced a lot of them. And what I've learned, and what I think we all learn, is that these are part of life. They are not mental illnesses. Grief over the death of a loved one is not a mental illness. Grief over having lost a job you loved or financial fear or stress, this is not a mental illness. Heartache after a divorce or breakup is not a mental illness. But what has happened in the last few years is a singularly, I think, disturbing phenomenon, where people are taking antidepressants as an antidote to things which are actually part of the normal spectrum of human emotion. And sadness is part of the normal spectrum of human emotion. But almost, I call it a psychotherapeutic pharmacological industrial complex, has absconded with the word depression.
Yeah.
And people say, people like myself are allowed to talk about sadness. But we're supposed to stay away from the word depression because depression is a whole different thing. It's a chemical imbalance. Well, first of all, I don't know anyone who's been diagnosed with depression who received a blood test. The diagnosis of depression is based on a questionnaire. And if you're going to talk about brain chemistry changing, brain chemistry changes when you meditate. Brain chemistry changes when you pray. So over the last few years, I have met many people who came to me, particularly young people, and this is why it's disturbing to me. The FDA, our Food and Drug Administration, has warned that for people 25 and younger, antidepressants can increase, not decrease, the risk of suicide. And yet, everybody's on antidepressants today. It's unbelievable. To me, the more disturbing epidemic than the depression is this casual use of antidepressants. People go, oh, your mother died, maybe you should be on something for a while, and so forth and so forth. So that's number one. I feel that there's a pushback against this that's already occurring, and I wanted to add my voice to that. But also, the great spiritual traditions have not only much to say about the phenomenon of human suffering, the core mythology of all the great religious systems deals with human suffering. Buddha began his journey to enlightenment because he saw age, disease, and death for the first time, because he saw human suffering for the first time. And his message is that life is suffering, and that things of this world can only bring temporary happiness at best. And yet, you and I live in a civilization that says in order to be happy, you need this or that thing outside yourself. And yet Buddha said that the very need and drive for those things ensures unhappiness because they can only bring temporary happiness. So much of what the modern world tells us is the key to happiness is actually the key to despair.
It's thinking that we have to have all these things lined up and be just so,
That's
and then I
so
can be happy.
you and I had our first conversation was sort of about that in terms of when our books come out. That's a perfect example. Having my book come out. It's very easy to get, oh, will my book sell a lot of copies? I hope my book sells a lot of copies. But I have to remind myself not to make a false idol, right? Or any idol is a false idol. Because if I think my happiness derives from that, then that's a setup for despair.
Yeah.
The second spiritual tradition that I talk about in the book is the story of Moses and the story of the Exodus. Moses was led by God to deliver the Israelites from their suffering as slaves under the Pharaoh, to take their journey through the wilderness, through the desert, to the promised land. Well, the Pharaoh in the story of the Exodus is the internal dictator, the internal ego mind. And so we are all enslaved and we are all suffering. That is the suffering of the world. And the suffering of the wilderness of the 40 years on your way to the promised land, the situation itself is painful, that situation of deliverance. And that's often what depression is. Depression is not a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes depression is a sign that something is being made right. Because psychic pain is like physical pain. It's there for a reason. It means something is wrong that you have to make right. And if you have a broken leg, you don't just take morphine, you reset the bone. So if you have psychic pain, you can't just numb the pain through pharmaceuticals or anything else. You have to reset your thinking.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the story of Jesus on the cross. The whole idea is his suffering. But once again, the suffering is not the end of the story. The suffering leads to the resurrection. So it's crucifixion to resurrection. It's slavery of the Israelites under the Pharaoh that lead to the promised land. And then Buddha recognizing suffering for the first time, and this leading to his journey to enlightenment. So I feel that what most people call depression today is what we, from a spiritual perspective, would call a dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
This is a spiritual problem that demands a spiritual solution. And the whole conversation and inquiry into depression has become so dominated by a pharmaceutical medical model that I felt it was time for those of us who think in terms of transformational and spiritual perspectives to weigh in. So that's what I've tried to do with this.
I love hearing that perspective. I know myself at times, it's easy we can focus on what's missing and what we've lost or what we think we might lose. That makes us feel sad and even after a loss. I know you've lost people in your life. I lost my brother after a long battle with actually a mental illness, schizophrenia. And I know at the time feeling terribly sad and grief-stricken, but this deep intuitive sense that the only way out of this is right through the heart of it, is just to feel that raw grief and sit with the sadness. And I know at the time I made a lot of space in my life to just sit with the ache in my heart. And I knew not to numb it, not to eat it down or drink it down or shop it away. And I think so often we try and escape the pain of the suffering. We don't want to actually confront that this is not working in my life, the divorce or the bankruptcy or whatever, versus we don't want to look at it because that's too hard. So it's easier to try and find some way to escape it or numb it or deny it. What's your experience with that?
Well, what you just said is exactly it. You articulated it so beautifully. I agree with you 100%. And that's really what the book is about. There's a poem by Rilke where he says, we squander the hours of our pain. In exactly the way you said, we have to make space for our sadness sometimes. Now, I do want to take this opportunity because you mentioned that your brother had schizophrenia. I certainly acknowledge that there are conditions such as schizophrenia, bipolar condition, and so forth, where psychotherapeutic drugs are not only beneficial, sometimes even life-saving. So I'm glad that you mentioned that because I want to make it clear that I'm not Tom Cruise or, no psychotherapeutic drug. Yeah. So my perspective is exactly what you just said. We have something over the last few years, we've somehow made being sad wrong. We take a cheap yellow smiley face, happy, 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 and we pour it over everything. And this, to avoid the pain is to avoid our humanity. And sometimes the things that we see when we are depressed are exactly what we need to look at. Something like the death of your brother. There was no place where you had to look at your own behavior. But a lot of times when we have a heartache, a divorce, or financial ruin or something, part of what's painful is having to face things that we haven't wanted to look at. Like, what part did I play in this? And sometimes, people talk about how people need medication or people need sleeping pills because otherwise they won't sleep. But sometimes those sleepless nights, as painful as they are important because the monsters come out at night that are not shooed away so easily as they are during the day in all the ways that you mentioned. And exactly what you said, you have to sit with the ache because the work is to atone for our own mistakes in cases like that and to forgive others for theirs. So the journey from that pain, that's why the subtitle is The Spiritual Journey from Suffering to Enlightenment. It's not like I've created a roadmap. All the great religious systems are roadmaps. Buddha's Four Noble Truths, his Eightfold Path, is a roadmap through right concentration, through right effort, through right mindfulness, through right speech, through right livelihood. You put your mind on track with that which is most noble and good, through forgiveness, through prayer. You put your mind into the place that is miracle ready, and by which your mind itself becomes a natural conduit for the miracle of healing, not only in your life, but in the lives of others. And then afterwards, and I'm sure you feel this way, I have lost a sister. I think that suffering gives you x-ray vision into the suffering of other people.
You wrote about that.
Having suffered, I think, makes you more sensitive to other people's suffering. And I think that's one of the things that's dangerous about all the things we're doing these days to avoid our suffering. If I desensitize myself to my own suffering, it's easier for me than to desensitize myself to the suffering of others, which will only create more suffering.
It's funny. I was talking to someone the other day. I had an eating disorder right through my teens and into my mid-20s. I had bulimia. And, I look back on that period and there was a lot of suffering as I was in the whole cycle that I was caught in. And eventually it was through actually the grace of God that I was able to heal from that, actually. But I look back on that now as an incredible gift because it made me so much more compassionate of people who sometimes are stuck in addictive cycles, whether it's gambling or alcohol. And I think had I never had that, it would have been very easy to have said, well, just stop it. It's silly. Don't do it. Like, why would you do that? And that's for me, it was like, why would a smart person do such a dumb thing? And I think we can all, it's so easy to be judgmental of others. And I think that compassion is so important.
Absolutely. Sometimes I will look at young women and they're a little too loosey-goosey with their sexuality. And I'll be about to judge them and they'll go, excuse me, you are so much worse. So just don't even think about that. And I also think when you have had times in your life where you have felt God's mercy, that you did get another chance, or maybe a third chance or fourth chance. I think when you have felt God's mercy on you, you are more likely to be merciful to other people. Because God would have us love others the way we have felt God love us. And I also, one of the things I talk about in the book also, Margie, is that we live in a depressing world today. And the fact that we feel depressed, given what's happening to the planet, and terrorism, and nuclear bombs, and it's almost like if we weren't depressed about this, if you're not grieving, you must not be looking very deeply. And I thought that was important, that what we're doing is the fact that people are so upset today. Paul Hawken uses the expression blessed unrest. The fact that people are so upset today is actually a sign of our mental health. And what's happened, we're like canaries, depressed people are like canaries in the gold mine. But the system that creates the suffering says that there's something wrong with the canaries.
Yeah.
The canaries are dying. Something's wrong with the canaries. No, nothing's wrong with the canaries. And I talk in the book about basically a culture of depression. We predicate, the principles on which we predicate our entire civilization are in complete contradiction to who we are as spiritual beings. We are here to love. Is that?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't know what that noise is actually, but just with that, when you talk about us being spiritual beings, what do you mean by that?
Well, the Course in Miracles says that enlightenment is a shift in self-perception from body identification to spirit identification. So if I only think of myself as a body, then my life began when my physical self was born. My life will end when my physical self ends. And I identify with a world of scarcity. I see myself as separate from you. I'm taught that I have to compete with you to get ahead and so forth. As I shift, as I transit to spirit identification, then I think of my physical birth as a beginning, as a continuation and not a beginning. I think of my death as a continuation, not an end. I think of your spirit not stopping at your body, my spirit not stopping at my body, and that there's, on the level of spirit, no place where you stop and I start, which means that what I do to you, I am doing to myself. What I think of you, I am thinking about myself. I relate to a world of infinite abundance rather than scarcity. And the Course in Miracles says you will be heir to the laws that rule within the world you identify with. So if I think it's a frightening world, I will be at the mercy of the rules that prevail within a scary world. So the spiritual work is an internal conversion to a sense of self as spirit. And this is not just an intellectual shift. It takes prayer, it takes meditation, it takes a serious spiritual path, whatever your serious spiritual path might be. And that's why a lot of people say, well, how to do it? Like they want 5 easy steps to enlightenment. But it's not easy steps. It's forgiving people who might have hurt you. It's atoning for your own mistakes. It's taking stock of how you're doing, not just on a physical level, but in terms of your ability and your capacity to love. And anything short of that will keep us stuck on the cycle of suffering. And so what's happening today is because we are taught a way of thinking that is in direct contradiction to our love, to our spirit, of course we're unhappy. Of course we're suffering. And then you get the same mind, which over-identifies with the body, saying, oh, you have a physical disease, and pouring that and saying medication is the answer. I think as women particularly, and as mothers particularly, given the fact that there are these increased suicide risks for our young people, I just think we as women have a moral responsibility to start yelling about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to just get on to talking a little bit about women for a moment. As a woman, as a mother yourself, at the moment I have 4 teenage children, and they're getting ready to spread their wings and go out into the world. And yet, I know I'm on my own journey as well still. And so when it comes to, I guess, supporting our children to go out and pursue whatever it is that they feel inspired by at this point in their lives, for me, I've shared with you, when my oldest moved over to the United States at 16, and like an ache in my heart, seeing my beautiful boy head off in the world at such a young age, but also having faith that our kids are going to have their own life journey and we have to support them in going off. And fear can so often, I see fear so pervasive in how we parent our children. And it keeps us, I think, from sometimes setting them up to be as bold and courageous and resilient as they could be. And it keeps, I think, a lot of us, creates a lot of suffering because we're afraid of what might happen to them in the world. And who will I also be once I no longer have my children all in my little nest here? And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that when you see women sort of moving through this phase of life in their 40s, sometimes in their 50s, and the children are leaving, and it's this whole new identity of, well, who am I when I'm not, looking after these kids all the time, and how do I help just send them off with deep roots and strong wings?
Well, 2 things. First of all, you talked about not extending fear. I think we want our children to be courageous. So I think that, there's that term helicopter mom, you're just hovering over them in every little thing. I think it's important as our children grow up, age appropriately, that we always be fostering them in whatever way is appropriate age-wise, at taking that little risk, going out on the limb, going a little further than mommy can take you in an age-appropriate way, so that by the time they do go off into the world, they're ready. And I think that's our highest achievement. Our highest achievement is they're ready to do that. They can do that, and they're happy doing that. I mean, I only have one. I have a great one. I envy you that you have more. That's my only real regret in life, is that I don't have more children. But there is nothing more beautiful than watching our children have their own lives and do their own thing. In terms of the identification with that and who am I without them, for me, because I didn't have my child till 37, it's different if a woman has her child, starts having her children at a very young age. I don't know how old you were. How old were you when you had your first child?
I was 29 with my first.
Well, you were already certainly a grown woman. Mine wasn't until 37. I already had a career. So for me, I just kind of slid back in. For those for whom that's not true, though, I think part of conscious parenting, and particularly conscious mothering, and particularly of boys, that's why in coming of age ceremonies, that's why in the Jewish bar mitzvah, the Jewish bar mitzvah, part of the coming of age ceremony is that it's a public declaration to the community, particularly to the boy's mother, that he is a boy no longer.
Yeah.
We have a crisis of adulthood in our society, and it's very selfish of us to hold on too tight to our children. I also know, as the mother of a 25-year-old, after a certain point, you have to earn their affection. I mean, maybe they'll always love you if you were a decent mother, but, after a certain age, they're not going to call you all the time unless they really want to. So I know with my daughter, and I've seen it, the fact that and I'm conscious of this, I give her due respect. I'm honored when she asks my opinion, but she's 25. And I think that if she felt from me an energy of, you owe it to me, or if she felt any energy from me that was not giving due respect to the fact that she's a grown woman, I don't think we would be as close as we are. As we are, we're best friends. And I'm so thrilled that we are. But I also see the ways that I give enough, as I said, respect and deference to the fact that she is a grown woman. I think it's always tempting to push beyond the boundary that is healthiest for our children. Maybe get a little too intimate in our conversation, tell a little too much or whatever. I think because I was a single mother, I think there you particularly have that. But and I'm not sure I always got that perfect. I don't know anybody, and you have 4 children, you would know. I don't know any parent who ever feels that once the kids grow up, wow, I did everything 100% right. I have nothing to feel sorry. Maybe the 4th one you got it all right.
Oh no, here's my challenge.
Parenting is like everything else in life. You course correct. And that's going back to the whole subject of sadness. Sometimes it's painful to see the ways that we might have done different. But I think with your children, you apologize and say, I really get that was not perfect. But most particularly, you just behave differently. Like maybe you don't call them quite so much. Wait till they call them and stuff like that. I
understand. Just in finishing up, Marianne, I wanted to just get your take on this because it's something I know I've struggled with, and I shared this with you when we first met, is this, and I see so many people struggle with this deep fear of not being enough, not smart enough, not beautiful enough, not successful enough, not enough book sales, not accomplished enough, not, I don't know, you name it, just not enough in some way. And it diminishes ourselves. And when I first met you, you said, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm an author, but not like you, not a success. And straight away, as you said to me, there is nothing holy in diminishing yourself. You really gave me a slap across the face. I was like, ow, didn't expect that. But it was wonderful. It was a great slap. And, what do you say to those who struggle with that sense of inadequacy and not feeling enough?
Well, it's exactly what I was saying earlier. If your sense of the outer world, those are idols. How smart you are, how many books you've sold. That's what happens. It's the 10 Commandments, and put no gods before me. If you put a god before God, then the idol will crash and you will suffer. You know, if you think that your identity is based on your book sales or based on your body or based on anything of the external world or your external manifestation, you will suffer. Because even if you're winning today, there's somebody's going to be winning the game more tomorrow. And that's exactly the point of shifting to spirit identification. When you shift to spirit identification, I love how in the Course in Miracles it says, all of the children of God are special and none of the children of God are special. You're the faucet, you're not the water. There just happens to be the Spirit of God in you. And that's why I said to you, when you said, not an author like you, it doesn't just put you down, it doesn't just throw you off, it throws me off. Because it's throwing off that's just taking us to a level of conversation that is simply, it's the falsehood, it's the lies of the world, and therein we suffer. So the Course in Miracles says you think you have many different problems, but you really only have one, and that is your separation from God. And that's the answer. When you say struggle, you will struggle until you accept yourself as a child of God who's no better or worse than anybody else. You happen to have the unlimited power of God within you. Nothing to take personal credit for, but for you to diminish that is diminishing God. Mm. Once you know that what is true about you is God, that doesn't mean you don't make mistakes, and whoever you're talking to, they've made mistakes too. But the more we do serious spiritual practice, and it's not an intellectual shift, but the more you pray, the more you meditate, the more you simply don't live in that place. And you are no better and no worse than anyone else. We're all one. That's the real meaning of the real metaphysical meaning of the term, there is only one begotten Son. We're all it. We're all like waves in the same ocean, and there's no place where one wave stops and another starts.
I think that metaphor you used of we are the faucet, not the water. And I heard you use that, when we first met. And when we doubt ourselves and when we talk ourselves down, we turn that faucet, or Australians would say that tap off. We can't let that energy flow, that spirit, that grace flow through us, that gift, everything just that allows for synchronicity to occur and everything else that's wonderful, and miracles to occur and healing to occur, and for us to be the blessing we can for others. And so I just love that idea of how can we, as these spiritual beings having a physical experience, have that faucet open so that we are, whatever's good flows through us, and we're not turning it off with all of those little negative, fearful thoughts and anger and all of that stuff that can get in the way of us just being fully who we are.
Through prayer and meditation. It's not intellectual. It's not mental. It's spiritual. You wake up in the morning, and the Course in Miracles says if you spend 5 minutes with the Holy Spirit in the morning, that's enough to guarantee He will be in charge of your thought forms throughout the day. If you're a student of the Course in Miracles, it's the Course in Miracles workbook or transcendental meditation, or there are so many different spiritual practices. But it's not just a share graphic. It's actually praying and actually meditating. It's beyond thinking positive thoughts. And it's a serious humility before God. It's where would you have me go? What would you have me do? What would you have me say, and to whom? I got a call from a friend this morning, and she had seen, I gave a talk the other day in Los Angeles at University of Southern California, their baccalaureate address. And it's on the internet, and people have been watching it. And she said, how do you do it? How do you do it? I said, I keep telling you guys do not believe me. You do not listen to me. You wake up in the morning and you serve God. You make it about God. You want to be the woman God would have you to be God's work. And I keep getting from you guys, oh, yeah, well, that's part of it. That's where most people are stuck. Oh, yeah, I really know that's part of it. No. It's not part of it. It's
all of it.
You have that. You are programming, your subconscious mind is programmed for that. So when you align with that, your subconscious, see, we're living in a world where everybody has so many dots, but doesn't know how to connect the dots. And because the dots cannot be creatively connected mentally, but an otherworldly force will connect them. The subconscious mind will connect them. But when you say people struggle with it, yeah, you're going to struggle with it. You can't stop that struggle as long as you think that you are that. If that's the world you relate to. But if you are willing to transition and say, God, use me. Just make me the woman you would have me be. When you do that, you don't have problems like, am I better or I'm worse? Because on any given day, you might be better. On any given day, you might be worse. You might have gotten it right today. You might have gotten it wrong today. You might have gotten it right today. You might have gotten, let's lighten up about the whole thing. You're just not tortured by that stuff.
Yeah. You just are.
You are, and also because you're only geared to be in relationship with the person in front of you. There's nothing else going on. So your mind isn't available for the ego's clutches, for that inner pharaoh. Satan, get thee behind me. That's what that means. Like those thoughts, just get out of my head. And when you get, in that sense, religious about it, not religious as in organized religion or dogma or doctrine or institutional religion, but it's more than just lightweight, gauzy, like
Namaste.
yeah. It's deeper than that. It's like, I give my life. May I be of use. Dear God, take my neuroses, take my pathologies, take my fears, and may I be the woman that you would have me be today. And that's when the stuff starts flowing. And that love that flows, miracles occur naturally as expressions of that love. See, what you have going for you, Margie, is your spirit is so bright and that I can see where you torture yourself a little bit with your head. But for other people, the spirit's so bright, nobody could even understand. Why would you do that?
Yeah. Well, I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
See, with you, and even that, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. It's kind of the problem. This is not something you can do.
Okay.
That's kind of what I mean.
I'm offering it up.
How about changing the language to, in this moment, I'm putting this in God's hands, and I'm sure He will remind me of the beauty that is already within me. Can you even bring yourself to consider that?
I absolutely can. I really can. I feel like actually that's how I handed up my eating disorder many years ago. It was like, God, by the grace of God, help me get through this. I can't do this alone. So I'm going to offer all that up, Marianne. I think that's a beautiful note for us to finish on. Thank you for another little quick slap in the face in the most loving way possible. And I have no doubt everyone who will listen to what you've had to say will be touched and moved and uplifted by you. So thank you for your gift and service.
Thank you. I am touched and moved and uplifted by you, Margie. Your light is so bright and it's so obvious to everyone. And I look forward to the day when it's as obvious to you as it is to the rest of us.
Thank you.
Much love to you. Thank you.
I'll see you. I'll let you know when I'm in New York next.
Please do. Come stay with me if you'd like.
Oh, thank you. All right. Take care.
Bye.
See you, Marianne.